Einen wunderschönen guten Tag, meine Damen und Herren. Ich darf Sie herzlich begrüßen hier zu unserer Podiumsdiskussion mit dem Titel Unternehmerische Verantwortung übernehmen und das alles in Zeiten von Corona. Mein Name ist Sven Astheimer, ich bin der Moderator und ich darf Ihnen jetzt das Podium mit den tollen Teilnehmern, wie ich finde, vorstellen. Wir fangen an von mir gegenüber außen. Der Herr mit der orangen Krawatte ist gut zu erkennen. Ich darf Ihnen in alphabetischer Reihenfolge die Teilnehmer vorstellen. Das ist Herr Stefan Feltens, den CEO, den Vorstandsvorsitzenden der Shop Apotheke Europe. Herzlich willkommen.
Vielen Dank.
Der Applaus muss ich jetzt denken, er wird kommen vom Auditorium. Neben ihm sitzt Hendrik Fink, er ist Partner und zuständig für Sustainability Services von PwC. Auch Ihnen herzlich willkommen, Herr Fink. Neben ihm sitzt Gabriele Hässig. Sie ist Geschäftsführerin Kommunikation und Nachhaltigkeit des Konsumgüterunternehmens
of the Procter & Gamble Group, Germany, Austria, Switzerland. These are the countries of her responsibility, the DACH region. And then, last but not least, Dr. Philipp Nimmermann. He's State Secretary in the Hessian Ministry for Economy, Energy, Traffic, Transport and Housing. A long title. Welcome very much. Ladies and gentlemen, when the program was developed, the Corona edition was not thought of in the program. In the meantime, it's the most important subject nowadays. You can't do it away. And I think our subject, how Corona changes the situation, is a really important point. And therefore, State Secretary, I would like to start with you before we go more deeply into the subject matter. Can you give us an overview of the Hessian economy? How are we doing? What are the consequences? Are they bad? Can we deal with that? Can we cope with that? And also what will happen in the autumn at the end of the year? For Hessia, we don't have the most recent economic figures. On the 24th of September, we have the domestic product, but definitely we have a very strong decline in the second quarter, and there are early indicators. We find that May maybe was the lowest point, and there are hopes and forecasts that we have a V-shaped recovery very soon. We'll see that once we have the figures for the third and fourth quarter. What we know from all the immediate programs, the relief programs, we see who asked for them. The bridge relief that is financed by the national government, and here we have a good breakdown of industries, and we see that there are a lot of industries that still have a lot of problems, that really had drops in April and May of 60%, and now more than 40. All event organizers, trade fair organizers, taxis, movies, corporate consultancies also, if you ask who files applications. And for that sector, we need a solution because social contacts, distancing, definitely event organizers and trade fair organizers will be affected very severely, and we need solutions. I assume that you and your ministry are called upon a lot since spring. Do you have time for other things, or is it all what you can master? Of course, March, April, May, these were the three most busy months, so to speak, in that respect. We developed the programs and then dealt with them. And now we look at programs, how we can become more robust with our economy in Hesse. I think it's an interesting discussion. I think sustainability should be postponed, people say. I think that's wrong. We can't do that. If you want to be versatile and robust, which means we go back to the original status, that's wrong, because the original situation didn't help us in the crisis. We need a different concept of robustness that helps us go into the future, forward-bouncing resilience. And here sustainability plays a very important role. Only then can we do the whole thing. We can consider the environment and also the economy. And with that, we can survive crisis much better than before. That's our basis. Thank you. Before we start to go into the discussion very deeply, I would like to ask the whole round, what's corporate responsibility for us? My personal experience is that there are different concepts around. You are an economist with a PhD. Milton Friedman, one of the pioneers of your business sector, summarized it in the following way. The responsibility of the entrepreneur is mainly to develop a good business model, generate profits, create jobs, and with that, strengthening national economies. What's your personal definition? I think there are several forms of responsibilities that entrepreneurs have to shoulder. First, the responsibility for the company, for the employees, customers, and shareholders. But also there is this social responsibility, and hopefully Milton Friedman also considered that. If you read the classics, Adam Smith and Co., you know, it's all written there. It's always summarized, and therefore we don't hear it. It's an important motivation, and the goal is to really increase prosperity for many people, and we see that very much magnified during the COVID crisis, how important social aspects are, how important it is to think about delivery systems, and that companies have donated masks. They were so willing so quickly to really help out where we had problems in our economy. Companies that not only consider short-term profits only, Milton Friedman didn't mean that. Long-term profit maximization means that you consider long-term, also consider the economy, the society, and the environment. This is a long-term perspective, which is the right one. And for me, that's sustainable and robust. So we have mentioned all the classical thinkers already, and donating masks, we'll hear more about that by Mrs. Hässig later on. But I would like to start with Mr. Fink, as it fits really well. PwC, you know, a consultant company, and therefore you have this very broad insight into companies. What's your assessment of the present situation and how sustainability is embedded in all this? You mean in the sense of corporate responsibility? Maybe it's an abstract answer that I can give you. Entrepreneurial responsibility means that we understand what is triggered by our business activities, also negative effects, but also positive effects, and then assuming responsibility to reduce negative effects, increase positive effects. And I mean, responsibility is very wide, not only the very strict shareholder value consideration involving employees, suppliers, society, etc., stakeholder approach, understanding very clearly what's the basis of my business model, what's the impact of it, and steering it correctly in the sense of global sustainability goals that we all subscribe to. If you know, consider into the background, in the anecdotes, what would you say? How many companies do it? Is awareness there? And where don't we have awareness yet? Can you break it down according to the size of the company? No, I wouldn't say it's the size. I think a lot is happening right now. In the past 18, 24 months, quite clearly, a lot more has happened than in the years before. ESG, sustainability, has come to stay. On the one hand, because there's more regulatory pressure, but also investors demand it. Investors also have understood that long-term returns only become possible if companies are managed properly. So a lot of activities independent of size. We have great examples of small companies that do great things, but also large companies. And in many cases, however, it's not fully embedded in the organizations yet. ESG and sustainability oftentimes is a parallel activity still, run by specialists, and employees don't have the information available and don't have the awareness to really use it in their everyday work. maybe a provocative question. Is it a subject of nice weather, which was good to communicate about in the past 10 years in good weather conditions, but now it's pushed aside because people need to survive? No. No, I think the crisis also has drawn a stronger focus on ESG and sustainability now, and the awareness that now we have to organize it properly from the side of companies, that has risen. Sustainability definitely is here to stay. It will become even more important. About anchoring it and how we do that, we can come back to that later on. Maybe a little hint to you in front of the screens. We also have the possibility to include questions that you raise. So make use of the tool, and if possible, we can ask those questions to the participants. Dear Mrs. Hässig, P&G is a global group, active everywhere. How did you live to see the past few months? What has changed in your field of business? Of course, Corona hit us globally, as you all know it. Every participant knows it, and all viewers know that. But to begin with, I would like to say that I share your opinion that responsibility is the basis of decent entrepreneurship. And we lived up to that responsibility during the Corona crisis. It starts with employee saying very clearly, not only saying it, but really living it, doing it, that health and security of all employees is top priorities, because this is the very basis for us to produce, deliver, and sell our products and brands so that you can find them in the shelves. So there are no compromises. This is internal responsibility, assuming internal responsibility. And then I can also execute it externally. It was really clearly for us that people trust in our products, Pampers, hygienic article, Meister Proper, cleaning detergents, you know. These are products that you find at home, and they need to be produced very safely, securely, not damaging health of employees. And then we can see what else we can do. We can do a lot. On the one hand, we have great employees. Yeah, I pay my tribute. And you donated masks as well? Yeah, we donated masks as well. Our production plants were used immediately. We first considered what they can do and what we can do, for example, from Worms. In Worms, we produced disinfectant for surfaces. In Euskirchen, we started the production of masks and supplied our employees with that, and we donated them externally. Can you give us a figure? It's impressive. Only in Germany, in the next few weeks, 1 million masks will have been donated altogether. Germany only. Disinfectants, more than 20,000 liters donated only in Germany. Of course, we do that around the globe as well, in the same way, and then the figures are bigger. Just add a few zeros, as we have operations in 70 countries of the world. So this is substantial help. How quickly can you do that? It has to be decided, and then it has to be executed. It costs money. Can you explain the process? It's highly interesting. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. It comes from both sides. It's not top down nor bottom up. It's together, yeah. As the needs are seen everywhere where we are, and this is considered, and then values and principles are determined. You know, everyone says purpose and principles, very nice. You write them down, and it sounds beautiful. But at the end, you really see what you really mean with them in a crisis situation, and then you see whether the management is there and supports that, and it was there. It was very clear right from the beginning that we we do everything possible, considering our principles and acting accordingly. We needed the budgets because without budgets you can't order. So compliance is important and processes need to be there. Our donations need to be taxed later on. Definitely we pay taxes on them. The legal basis needs to be fulfilled. That's indispensable. So it has to go together. You need authorizations and permissions for all those activities. That is, managers all over the world, Europe, locally in Germany, lay down the principles and priorities, and then budgets are released, and then we can act. Okay, these were the crisis measures you took, but it didn't fall from heaven. We talked about it at other places before. What about your corporate responsibility in non-crisis times? Where do you show a lot of commitment? Corporate responsibilities everywhere. It starts with governments and it goes over to social responsibility and sustainability. And this is not an idea that came about yesterday, otherwise I wouldn't stand or sit here today. That's very clear. We didn't discover it only yesterday. Let's briefly look back. In the 60s, we became the largest washing detergent manufacturer in the world. And then we learned what we have to do in order to have clean rivers, phosphate-free. That came because of that, as we had to solve the solution with pollution of rivers. And now we face responsibility with plastic. What do we find in the oceans? Plastic. We don't want it there, and for that reason we need to find a solution. We have to address the problem. It's a big problem. So together with others we created the Alliance Against Plastic Waste. And of course we don't reach the Paris goal, all of us together. We are not in a position to do that, so we have to speed up. So a few weeks ago, we decided that from 2020 to 2030, our decade, now, not later, we want to be climate neutral. So during this very decade, we reduce our CO2 emissions by 50%, and everything that is remained will be compensated for. It's important to do it now. Yeah, ambitious goals. And later on we'll come back to that and find whether we can earn money with that and how you can do it. Now, Mr. Feltens, you waited for a long time. You are the CEO of Shop Apotheke. It's a young company compared to Procter & Gamble. Okay, the name tells already what you do, but let us hear in a few sentences what you do basically, who you are, what you do. Yeah, thank you very much. Shop Apotheke is a pharmacy. We are one of the leading online pharmacies in Europe. At the moment, we are active in 7 markets. In continental Europe, the largest market, of course, is Germany for us. And you hinted at that. My tie points it out. It's coincidence. We sit in the Netherlands. We are a relatively young company. We were founded 2001. And maybe I would like to tell you a little anecdote. At that time, it was founded with respect to the very soon introduction of the e-prescription. That was 2001, and now it comes 2021. It took a bit longer. 2016, we became a listed company. And directly after the IPO, I have to admit sustainability was not always top of our agenda, but this has changed. I really speak on behalf of the entire management team. We drive it from our inner conviction now, as we know that ambitious growth plans that we have without progress in sustainability cannot be implemented at all. Because then the different stakeholders, of course our customers, our employees, but also our investors, would not stay loyal with us. So it's indeed a strategic subject for us. It's highly essential also if it's quite young for us. Directly before the outbreak of the corona pandemic, Sustainability was initiated for us as a company. We made a comprehensive stock taking, and now we are in a position, of course, much smaller than Procter & Gamble. Now we are in a position to develop a very long project list and implement it gradually. Very interesting. Talking about the drivers of that development, Mr. Fink pointed it out before. Oh, BlackRock has the same name. The largest investor said very clearly that they would only invest into sustainable companies any longer. So the symbols and signs are very clear of the capital market. You mentioned it before. What about among your employees? How many employees do you have? 1,500 nearly. We have grown very strongly. Of course, we have still this startup character. We are a relatively young company, and I don't tell you any news. If you want to attract young talents that are willing to work in such a startup environment, sustainability, climate protection cannot be left out. When is it asked in the interview? I mean, otherwise, you know, people would not come to the interview if we were not a company that is open with respect to sustainability and environment and does something. It has started, but in the months and years to come, definitely we can show results that can be measured. Could you give us an example of your project list? What do you do right now? We are growing tremendously, and we are moving into a new office building. Of course, this new location has different environmental standards compared to the old one. On the roof, it's a large flat roof. We have solar panels there. We don't have any gas connection to the utility network any longer. We don't need it any longer. And also, a different aspect of sustainability is the working environment that we can offer to our employees day and night compared to the old location. So on a voluntary basis, more and more employees return to the offices from home office. We offer it new. We offer membership in sports studios because health is so important for us, for our employees. The complete electricity will be from renewable sources. So a few highlights only, things that we have ticked off already or that are being implemented right now. It's a very long list of projects. And this is also important. As a matter of fact, it was a bottom-up process where with each and every department we came together, their ideas were generated, evaluated, and then priorities were set. So leadership was a lot of work, I assume. Yes, correct. Now, briefly, as this is a topical matter, home office, you know, do people come back voluntarily? What about productivity? What would you wish to have as executive? We don't have a final idea of it yet. Okay, we have some processes with which we can measure productivity, and we found that in home office productivity didn't go down, at least at the beginning of the home office phase. After that, there was a little ditch, you know, maybe there was some habituation process, getting used to it, but especially in Cologne, for example, where the commercial team sits, where IT is, and where we have most people working from home office, and here we are just discussing how to deal with that. An American large bank found that, strangely enough, Mondays and Fridays the productivity goes down in home office, but I don't want to broaden that. It's interesting. Short-time work was no issue? No, on the contrary. There were times where we worked 7 days in 3 shifts. You know, and I would like to really appreciate what our team has done. We tapped additional capacities in order to handle all the orders that came in, especially in the second half of March and April and May, in order to come to terms with that. Let me mention our web shop was not switched off a single minute. Every order that came in could be handled and processed. Internal responsibility, another catchword. Last question here. It's interesting. How do you perceive this internal responsibility, and where would you say we can't do it forever? We wear out our employees. Have you found a system where you would say now it's for a limited period of time and you recruit new people, or what do you do? We look for new employees all the time. We have grown so strongly, and this will go on in the future. Now we invest at our new site, also with respect to automation a lot, because in particular now at our location the labor market was difficult before Corona. Now it normalizes a bit, so it was important for us that, especially when it comes to distribution, we decouple growth from demand of employees. Yeah. Thank you very much. Mr. Fink, we briefly talked about it before, the business case. Business case, sustainability, has this voluntary character, charity character still, if you want to put it that way. Companies need to earn money, and the more you do here, volumes go up. We've heard that. Could you give us your impression how strongly this is integrated already into the business models? What's your feeling? The discussion is still a surprise, you know. For me, the evidence is there already. It's clear that you earn the same amount of money with sustainability, or even more, as you manage it decently and properly, and with that you reduce systemic risks in your business model. It becomes more resilient, more robust, and you get a better overview where growth opportunities are. And growth opportunities to a major extent are sustainability. And every company that doesn't have it on the radar screen would run into performance problems in the midterm. You know, there was so many numerous studies, and every investor demands that. I think that proves already that the broad public really believes in that. Mrs. Hässig is nodding. There is a lot of agreement on the panel. I tried to find some issues where this is not the case, but you can confirm that, that there is tough calculation. I think both is true. We need to stop to the ones to see it as an antagonism, you know. It's really important to have both. We need healthy growth, and we want to assume the responsibility respectively. It's not a contrast. It's not opposing each other, and that's wrong, this debate that we observe once in a while. To have sustainable business models, this really is worth it. There is a good return, and then we can invest more into it. And we need much more investment in order to reorganize our business models. If we change products, it means machines need to be produced for that. So it's not opposing each other. We want to have force for good and force for growth. We want to be that force. So that sustainability, as you put it before, I mean, we don't do it that way. It's not a staff line function or anything that comes in addition. It's an integral part of the way how we operate and the goals we have. And for that reason, just to close the point that you opened before, this is something which is just as important. It's continued. It's not an add-on which you just drop. It's part of being successful today and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. And we as branded market a branded product producer, we live on the trust of the company. Without this trust, we won't be successful ever. And a big part of trust is assuming responsibility and proving it. I would like to mention a question from participants to you, Mrs. Hässig. I read it out. Joachim Gansig asked, how is the sustainability strategy embedded in the supply chain, considering the UN SDGs? You know, we have the sustainability development goals. I think it's 20, 24, 17, so it's more than one dozen. How are they integrated into the supply chain? This is a big issue in the World Economic Summit Davos, for example, they talk about it. How do you do that at Procter & Gamble? Maybe you can answer first and then your colleagues can come in. Responsibility is shown in the supply chain quite clearly. We have our specifications, and there are requirements to be fulfilled in our specification. And that needs to be very clearly communicated. It starts with the codes of conduct, the ethical principles, and the same goes for sustainability. So FSC, forestation, etc. This is an important part, and it goes in all the other categories. You find it everywhere. Particularly as we are a global group, we have a lot of possibilities how to design our supply chains. You could give us an insight into it, because it's interesting for people who are not close to it as you are. How can you check the first supplier? Yes, but the sub-supplier and the sub-sub-supplier, how do you do that? How can you check their conditions of production? Are there random checks or local authorities in Asia that do it on your behalf? Yeah, it's really complex. It's based on clearly asking what shall be part of the specifications, and that's a global standard. It's really important. Standards are really helpful, and the same for norms. And then suppliers are obliged to fulfill, and there are processes in our global supply management to consider that and follow it up. We are not only exporting, no, we have our people all over the globe working for us, and this helps you to get it going. Mr. Fink, from your point of view, you made an experience how it can be dealt with in Asia, for example, with sub-suppliers. Maybe with a supply chain law, we ask companies to take liability for things and processes that they can influence only to a certain extent, and as there are sub-suppliers, they don't have the control any longer, or they just have the certificates on paper, but as a matter of fact it's not fulfilled. That's a really difficult discussion. On the one hand, it's very clear that a company has to take more responsibility for the entire supply chain, and of course there are different levers and possibilities where you can improve it still. But on the other hand, of course, the approaches are very general. Sometimes you have problems between states, or United Nations come in and they urge the countries to really live that, and there are problems and obstacles. It's a very difficult split oftentimes for companies. You hear it with the names, the suppliers, the sub-suppliers, the sub-sub-sub-sub-sub-suppliers. You have 6 intermediates or whatever, and that's really difficult. And even companies close to the final consumer have problems, but they have a stronger power to really do it. It's good to have a representative of politics at the table. State Secretary, you hear that companies really try their best. Why do you have to control and curb and stop them with a law that makes it even more difficult for them in difficult times already? What does it mean we control them and curb them? The law is not there yet. There is a white paper, and we all know that it has not been agreed yet in the Grand Coalition how it will be in detail, but there will be something. And there is a survey of Infratest-DIMAP, and it says that 90% of those asked believe that companies should assume responsibility for their supply chains, and more than 70% were of the opinion that politics should accompany it, not curb and control it, but rather just set a standard. And you heard a great example of how you should deal with the supply chain, and the crisis has shown it. If you don't deal with your supply chain now, asking whether it really makes sense to have so many sub-suppliers, you have to be able to control it, and in a crisis situation, not everyone can perform. Maybe that was not the best solution of all. So when you deal with your supply chain, you assume more responsibilities and you see new opportunities, bearing in mind the whole responsibility you have for the entire production system. So I think that sets a direction. That's the task of a company. If you bear in mind how many mistakes can be made and what impact such a supply chain problem can have if responsibility is not fulfilled properly, then politics has to come in. Whether maybe for number 10 sub-supplier you have to show liability, this is a different matter, whether you have to assume here legal liability. But what's important first is transparency. Transparent presentation of the sustainability of supply chains, fulfillment and non-fulfillment. That's also transparency. Then customers can decide what to do, not to do green bashing or sustainability bashing, however you want to call it. I mean, global standards and certification is really important. With certification, you can do a lot. Knowing, however, and we have learned that even if consultancy is certified, we not really can be sure 100% whether it's correct. But I think the attempt has to be made. We need to be pioneers and we have to show transparency very clearly. Offering it only as a voluntary possibility, I mean, this is not human. You know, you can't expect from people that they don't want to make a profit, they just want to rescue the world. No, this is not true. So politics really has to accompany it. Everyone is nodding again. Harmony is there. Let me try differently. Catchword bureaucracy. Especially measures of crisis, a lot has been done very quickly. What about the processes and the framework? Is it as you wanted it to have, or would you say from the point of view of companies, certain things should be changed, especially when it comes to bureaucratic hurdles? Mrs. Hässig, if you produce 1 million masks, I think it's an advantage of a large company that we have our set processes and experts that can deal with bureaucracy. Maybe for small companies it was more difficult. They don't have their specialized departments that can deal with all the rules and regulations and specifications. I mean, industrial association, maybe we should mention them and praise them as well. They assumed this large task of transparency. They clarified very clearly how it's to be done with disinfectants. What's the standard for production here? And then we uploaded that and had it, and we were very clear with the formulations, etc. And then there were debates how to understand it, and German associations were really helpful. And then we could give the information also to small companies, yeah, like hairdressers, beauty studios, etc. What rules they had to fulfill. So other elements of the larger supply chain, or rather customer chain, you know, definitely also for your area that was important. So as a big one, I can deal with bureaucracy. For smaller ones, maybe it was more difficult. Mr. Feltens, you are a bit smaller than Procter & Gamble. You mentioned that you have a representative of politics here. If you had a wish, free, what would you say? How to accelerate processes? We would be the only company that didn't complain about bureaucracy. There is a long list. Let me take one example, data protection. There you have to ask again and again, maybe here and there we have done too much. Whether innovation was prevented or only delayed. But once again, definitely we could go through a long list of points very easily as a small company, definitely. Admittedly, as you have just said, we don't have the resources and we don't have processes as you have it normally with a large global group. And at some stage you always end up at the European level when talking about that subject, where there is a lot of regulation happening. Mr. Fink, you are a member of a working group in the service of the European Union Commission. What do you do here in sustainability? Yeah, the European Union Commission developed the task that we have to analyze how a future reporting standard should look like for sustainability. And there is this project task force, which is part of the EFAG organization. What does that mean for everyone who don't know the abbreviations? The organization is responsible for financial reporting, and there was another working group around that can use the infrastructure, and they take care of financial reporting and other issues, and they become more and more important for listed companies in particular. And this task force shall analyze now how a future reporting standard should look like, based on the experience that we have gained. With the CSR directive, there has been some criticism, especially with implementation. There is no true comparability if you have a look at the content of non-financial reports. You know, here the content is very different. The performance indicators are defined differently, so you can't compare it properly. And users have difficulties to find the information. Some have it in their management report, others have it in their sustainability report. So there is this long list of shortcomings. And the European Union is in a phase of revising the CSR directives. Till the end of 21, a new one will be published, and in that framework there was the question whether we need a new standard. All right, we want to get more insight in what direction it will go. Essentially, it's a political question, of course. At the moment, in the market, you wouldn't see any standard that fulfills everything, neither with GA or the SASB or the other standardization institutions. So the European Union Commission wants to have its own standard, probably. It has not been decided yet, but it's discussed in the working group. So we have to develop concepts and ideas about the components of such a standard, and then the Commission might decide at some stage whether they have it written internally as a European Union standard, or whether there is a more global standard setting company that can do it on Friday under the roof of the FRS Foundation, GRI, SASB, the American Sustainability Standard Setter, CDSP, all of them came together, and they want to cooperate more closely and thus align present-day standards more. So there is market pressure somehow. Does it happen as such, or is there need for political interference? I think the European Union Commission really exerts pressure in that respect with standard setting. The old mechanism, if you don't do it, we do it. And then something is happening. Is that your experience as well? I think the most important role of politics is, after showing very clear attitude in what direction we shall go, we have to network actors. In Hessia, we did the following. The Green Sustainable Finance Cluster was founded together with Deutsche Börse. We have had it for 3 years now already. All the members, as many as possible, market participants are brought together, and we discuss questions like that: standards, taxonomy, terminology, etc. We address that. And once you have your terminology, we need to ask how we can implement it. Self-commitment, or if that doesn't work, how else we shall do it. And the state can also say that the big ones should do more. The SME interests are to be protected particularly, but on bureaucracy I would like to say something, because it's linked somehow. If we demand something, we have to control it. Bureaucracy is nothing else but administration, making sure that tax revenues are spent in a just and fair way according to the rules that we have adopted together. So it's not arbitrary. Yeah, we want to use the necessary bureaucracy in order to allow everyone gaining access to funds if needed. But we also want to do away with unnecessary red tape. Let me tell you how effective we worked. It took us only 3 weeks till we saw the pandemic and till the first decisions were taken in Berlin. So in 3 weeks we programmed the software system and servers in order to handle the immediate relief program colleagues worked day and night for 3 weeks and established it, and we have been really successful. And in Hessia, we had hardly any frauds, because we wanted to have the mix. The money has to go to the companies very quickly, but it's not helping if there is a lot of fraud, thus questioning the entire system. So we took extra loops. And what we can do else is we can digitize more the online access law. How can we make sure that red tape is reduced with the help of more digital interfaces? How can we do that? And that's helpful. Also with the help of artificial intelligence, we can control and monitor in a meaningful way. And we have a close dialogue. And I found in the crisis, close cooperation with the chambers, Crafts and Trades Chamber, Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Hessia really has helped us enormously. At any time, finding out what do we have to do, where can we help out, where can we support each other, and we have developed a really close and trustful cooperation with the chambers. All right. You not only rounded it off, you even used catchwords like digitization and artificial intelligence, opening up new subjects which would lead to a separate discussion round, which we can't do today for time reasons. We are at the end already. It went by so fast. It was really lively and vivid, and you gave us very interesting examples. In a nutshell, maybe I can say, from everything you have contributed, that from your points of view, the corona crisis doesn't lead to the situation that sustainability and corporate responsibility is forgotten about. On the contrary, it might become stronger as a result. Only companies can survive, especially listed companies. The capital market is a driving force, but only those who fulfill these goals can survive in the long run. And the state, we have learned, wants to play an active role, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises. As we have heard, the smaller a company, the more difficult it is, and SME protection really is important. Maybe there is some red tape around that you can do away with. All right, thank you very much for the great round, and let's give back to the program manager. Thank you very much for your attention.